or is faulty. So anyway, one of the people I was discussing this with, that amazing retreat I gave in Sydney some years ago, some wonderful stories from that. But the guy who took me from the airport to this retreat was a doctor, and GP. And when I was talking about it, I said, oh yeah, when he was actually in medical school, they talked about that CT scan of the boy with no brain, and he told me more information about it. It was done again. Again, they thought the machine was faulty. But then it wasn't faulty. The fellow's got no brain. He's got 1% cortex of what's usually expected there. But that's not enough. No one can expect that to be able to give you the ability to get a first-class honours degree in mathematics and to be invited to do research in mathematics. He had a girlfriend. I remember reading the article, he said, well, to say it's normal is actually not quite right, because as a student he didn't have any problems. he was like better than normal. He's emotionally very well balanced, intellectually very acute, very sharp, but he had no brain. And the doctor who told me this said, you wouldn't believe just how much problems this is given to neuroscience in the world. And he said, it's just so difficult to accept that most of these neuroscientists are just putting it in the back of a filing cabinet somewhere and trying to forget it. It's true, but it's too troublesome. But I love examples like that, which it shows you there's a fellow who's got a very strong intellectual ability without a brain. Just cerebral fluid inside. Now, I'm just going to do a little experiment. Can you just move your head back and forth like this? Can you hear any sloshing inside? If you can, it means you've got no brain too. Just cerebral fluid inside. But no, seriously, there's so many other examples of that. One of the other examples, which is in our modern world, is, I've seen this, and I've asked other people, have you experienced this? And the last time I asked, it was in a hospital over in Singapore, and they told me there is actually a medical word for this. Now, it happens so often. It's called terminal lucidity. What that means is people who have like terminal illness, and terminal illness doesn't mean going to airports as much as, that's what I said, went to so many airport terminals, I'm going to get terminal illness sooner or later. But COVID has stopped that. And the real terminal lucidity is when somebody is really close to dying. Or they've been in a coma, even sometimes for days. Or they've had Alzheimer's. They haven't been able to recognize you. They've been conscious, and you go into the room, they don't know who the heck you are. But terminal lucidity is just either the last few hours of their life or the last few minutes of their life. It's like they wake up. And if they've had dementia for a couple of years, they recognize you. Oh, Peter, how are you? Where you been? And that shocks you because they haven't known who the heck you are. And their brain has got this damaging whatever it is, which creates that sort of dementia. Or even one of the doctors in Nolamara, I mentioned this a lot, and this story always comes up in my mind. He came up to me and said, yeah, you're right, Ajahn Brahm, because it happened to him just the week before that one of his patients, this gentleman, I don't know, 60s or 70s or something, a male, who was under his care, and when the dying process began, it started earlier than he expected. So the nurse noticed the process of dying had begun. So called the doctor ran to the room, checked him out, yeah, he was going. And so the words which the patient said was to let the family know when he was going to die, so they could be around to see him and hold his hand, or even though he was in a coma this last day or two. And so the doctor said he was he had the book. It was in the bedside drawer of the patient, and the patient had given permission a few days before, if this happens, please ring up these people. And he rang up a couple of the relations. Now he's calling up this man's daughter, on the phone, the old phone, by the bedside. No, Julie, please come to the hospital quickly. I'm afraid to say your father is dying. And he said, at that point, the father opened his eyes up and said, please tell Julie how much I love her. And then he passed away in the next second or two. He said, it's beautiful, but almost unbelievable. He shouldn't have been able to do that. Because, he was dying, his brain wasn't working anymore. What happens, obviously, is that the brain is not working, the mind takes over. And that's also what people use that mind to access your past life memories in hypnosis. I always love hypnosis because it's a much more often used way of accessing the qualities of the mind. And there's so many amazing documentaries about how people do this. And there's one BBC documentary I saw years and years ago, and there's this guy, and he just, somehow or other, something happened to his brain. He was unconscious, and he got taken to the hospital, and when he came to again, he'd lost his short-term memory. And he'd just been remarried about 6 months earlier, and he didn't know who the heck he was married to, which was not very nice. And it wasn't playing around. I know some of you guys might think, oh, that's a good idea. But this was actually true. He didn't know who the heck this girl was. And it was only married about 6 months earlier. And no one knew what caused this sudden loss of memory. And so what they did, and the BBC were in on this, they actually took him to a hypnotist. And in hypnosis, you could access all his memory. And he said what had happened, he was this is in the old English homes in London somewhere, and he was in a little shed in the back doing some work, and the telephone, the old telephone, not the mobile phones, rang in the house, and he ran to answer it. And just the shutter of the shed was open. So he hit his head quite hard on the shutter and fell down. And of course, he didn't remember that. There was probably a bruise there, but probably so much hair they didn't see it. But he said that's what caused the injury. And he could remember, his dear wife, the time of his marriage, and how happy she was making him. He could remember everything under hypnosis, but not in real life. And so they gave him this post-hypnotic suggestion. When you wake up, you will remember your marriage day and your wife. And then they took him out of hypnosis. He still couldn't remember her. But under hypnosis, he could. And that's one of the reasons why there's so much under hypnosis that you can recall. And what you recall is pretty accurate. And that's also why people use past life regression. Because your mind doesn't just remember what happened in this life, you remember what happened in previous lives as well. And that's where you get some really interesting stuff. Of course, you know that our current president, Dennis, he's really into this, so he tells me all these amazing stories. There's this one guy who was, he's a fellow hypnotist over in Sydney, and he had this young girl, she's only about 16 years of age, and she was anorexic. Had tried every treatment. The poor mother and father were trying everything to try and heal this anorexia. It was literally killing her, this 16-year-old kid. And so, well, why not? It doesn't do any harm in hypnosis. Maybe it costs a bit of money, but not that much. So they took her to this hypnotist, and because the girl was 16, the mother had to be there at all times, to make sure that no funny business was going on. So the guy put the girl under hypnosis, and she was very easy to hypnotize. But then what happened was she started to recall her previous life. The 16-year-old in her previous life had committed suicide. And the reason she had committed suicide because she had fallen in love with this guy in her previous life, But in a previous life, she had an elder sister who'd also fallen in love with the same man. And so, these two sisters were competing for this guy. And the guy eventually chose the elder sister because she was more attractive. And that broke the heart of this young girl in a previous life. And she just killed herself. That makes a lot of sense. Sometimes people have so much suffering because they're not good enough. In this case, a woman not pretty enough to marry the love of her life. And the sister gets the guy. And that was, of course, it makes a lot of sense. Well, the amazing part of that story was, while they were saying this, the mother was going berserk. She was crying and sobbing. This poor hypnotist had two people to look after now. Just the little girl had to take her out of hypnotic state, and the mother who's going hysterical. And of course, once he calmed them down, she asked, the mother, why? What's happening? And that's when the mother said, I was that sister. I never told my daughter this, that her auntie had committed suicide. There's some things you don't tell your family. And the reason why she committed suicide was because we both fell in love with the same guy. And that's this girl's father. She couldn't actually be his wife, but she came back to be his daughter. And this is, no one could actually predict this because the mother never said anything to the daughter. And this is actually the cause of that. All those memories kept in your mind. And sometimes people say, well, maybe I don't need to know these memories. Maybe it makes this life a little bit more complicated. Which is one of the reasons why sometimes people get close to these past life memories and say, no, it's just a bit too much for me. Just like that Thai girl. I won't say who she is. I haven't seen her for a while now. But in a village in the northeast of Thailand. And she was in a previous life. She had a lot of kids. The kids did very well at school, especially one of her kids, the son. He went to university, which is quite hard to do if you're from the villages. Very smart fellow. And became a teacher. And because this was his local area, he became the headmaster, the principal of the local school. And when, I think it was the principal's sister had a child, had a daughter, they found out that the daughter was his mum, this girl before. She got reborn as the principal's niece. And she had such good memory of her previous life that everybody accepted that that was the principal's mother in the previous life, now his niece. Acceptable, shouldn't be a problem, except when the little girl went to school. And the school where the principal was her son in the previous life. So, a couple of Thai people here at least, and you know just how strict those schools are, especially, this is about 40, 50 years ago, especially in the northeast. When the principal comes in, you've got to stand up. But this girl, I'm not standing up for my son. And if you're naughty, you get the cane. But how could a principal cane your mum? Just could not do it. So she said she had an amazing time at school, didn't learn anything, had a lot of fun, because the principal was her son in the previous life. No one accepted that. So that's one of the reasons why we try and keep some of these things quiet. But anyway, it gets you some idea of the nature of the human mind. Amazing thing. And it's that mind, a stream of consciousness. Call it a stream of consciousness to answer this question before it comes up tonight. Because it's a simile, a word used by the Buddha, Vijnana Sota. Sota means stream or river. Because you use the simile of a river, you stand on the bridge, you see the water today, you see the water yesterday, you see the water tomorrow. It's exactly the same river, it seems. That's why they give it a name, Swan River or Canning River or the Thames River or whatever you wish to call these rivers. But the water is always different. So it looks like consciousness, mind. It looks the same, but it's always different. It's a stream of flow. And that just flows into your next life, or it can actually stop. That deep Dhamma yesterday, if the causes stop, then the stream stops, the candle goes out. That's why I always, when I heard that, who was his name? That's like Elton John. He wrote this music, Candle in the Wind, which was played at Princess Diana's funeral. And I thought, wow, yes, that fellow must have been a Buddhist. Because each one of you are candles. When you blow you out, you're gone. Anyway, I don't know really what I'm talking about, because Elton John happened after I became a monk. At least when I got to know about him. Anyway, where was I with, not Elton John, with, the mind, yes. Stream of consciousness. Now, once you actually get to know this, you realize that that is always there, but it's dominated by our five senses: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. To the point that even in the Pali language, now they have a whole word for the five sense world called Karmaloka. It's K-long-A-M-A. Karmaloka is a five sense world. Which is why, if any of you look at these teachings of even meditation, in the Pali, you know that what even the first jhana is, vivichehi kamehi, having let go, separated from the five sense world. That's the definition given by the Buddha of the first jhana. The five senses vanish. You're not unconscious because you have that sixth sense, which is far more powerful. Now, of course, each one of you, I will guarantee, money back guarantee, that I don't know how much you donate to stay here. It's called a booking bond, otherwise known as a fee. Donation. But you'll get that back if this doesn't happen to you. I promise. And Ajahn Brahm keeps his promises. You'll all experience the five senses disappearing. And Nimitus. When you die! That's why it's a pretty safe guarantee. Because you've heard people have near-death experiences. They go out of the body. And one of the first times, one of the stories which it was in a newspaper, which somebody, or a magazine somebody cut out for me. There's one of these politicians, I think it was Graham Edwards, federal politician, lived in Perth, but he was in a wheelchair. Because he was Graham Edwards, wasn't it? Yes. Yeah. He was in the Vietnam War, and he went to go and help one of his friends who was wounded, only slightly wounded. And because he was not looking after himself, he was looking after somebody else, he trod on a landmine and blew his legs off. Which is a terrible thing to happen. But what happened next was the interesting part, because he said had enormous pain, unbearable pain, and then the next moment, no pain, and floating, in his words, floating above the paddy fields of Vietnam without a care in the world. Just blissful, happy experience. Why is that blissful, happy experience? Because the burden of your body, and not just one with just a great injury, but even the experience of a body before, it's very heavy having a body. And that's a really good word, like heavy. It holds you down, it tires you down. There's so much demand of this body, to eat, to go to the toilet, to scratch. There's so many things you have to do with this body. But it's gone for him. And he'd say, one of the most wonderful experiences of his life. He didn't know how long he was floating above the paddy fields of Vietnam, just enjoying being without a body. But then he remembered he had a wife back here in Perth. And she just recently, a month or two earlier, given birth to his first child. And he thought, no, it's not right just to abandon your child like that. So that thought of parental responsibility, he just got pulled straight back into his body again and just felt enormous pain once more. And then just unconscious, the next thing he knew, waking up in the hospitals to be fixed up as best they could. That out-of-the-body experience was the one which was so amazing for him. And I quote, this guy was not a Buddhist. He was a federal politician. And he was, but it was an honest description of how he felt. And it brings to mind the piti sukha, the joy of a big burden having fallen apart, fallen away. So quite honestly, the dying process is painful. But once you've gone past the end of that dying process, you're actually dead. Yeah. You've got something very pleasant to look forward to. And I say that not as a joke. A very beautiful experience once you've gone past that death point and you're free of this very heavy body. But that is when just the mind is taking over, rather than the brain. The brain is gone, it's stopped, it's not working anymore in near-death experiences, which is why you can do all these amazing things and it feels good. There is also, I like also recommending that story of, what's her name again? The Indian girl living in Hong Kong who died. Miss Murray, was it Anita Murray, was it? Anita Murray. You know, because she had this really bad cancer. There's another interesting story. Really, really bad cancer, I mean really bad. And so most of her body was just, had cancers all over and other problems. And so she was in the hospital, under surgery, totally anaesthetized, so they thought, and she died. And after she died, she went floating up, free of her body, up towards this light. And that's what I'm supposed to be talking about, that light, Nimitus, your citta, your mind. And she entered that and blissed out for a while. But she also came back with the insight, enjoying the bliss. The insight which she got from that experience was the cause of her cancer. And it was a very wonderful explanation, because she said the cause of her cancer was just trying to please other people. And that was, wow, well done. She was a very successful woman. Nice husband, nice family, nice job. Everything was going well for her. Only had these terrible illnesses, cancers. And the insight was that this was all caused by some stress. Probably most of that stress she couldn't even notice because it's been there all the time. Just like a fish can't know what water is. It's always been there for you. When she left that body, you could actually see it clearly. Always wanted to live up to other people's expectations, please others. Live her life for her parents, her partner, her children, or somebody else, instead of just being herself, being free and just doing her best, but not having that stress of trying to live up to some expectations which she could not always fulfill. And after she realized that, the wonderful saying that when she came back and she came into consciousness again, she said, "Oh, my cancer's cured." And the doctors thought that she was crazy because just coming out of anesthetic. She said, no, I'm cured. I won't have cancer again. And it was true. She's seen the course. Cut off that course and cancer went. And the nice little bit about, I don't mind saying this, the nice little bit about this story, that her GP at that time is the current GP at Serpentine here, who comes, he's a Buddhist now, and he comes to our talks and even comes on weekend retreats. Good old Dr. John. So I said, this is really weird, that connection between that story and now he's our local GP in Serpentine, Western Australia. Ooh. But anyway, that's what happens when you die. So one of the things here is You've heard that before, people are floating towards the light. I mean, what actually is that light? That is a good example of what we call Nimitus. When you die, your 5 senses stop. When you get into deep meditation, your 5 senses stop. When you're starting to get to this delightful breath, the breath starts to disappear. It's not disappearing in the sense you're not breathing anymore. What's happening is you can't feel it, because the sense of physical touch has stopped. You can't see, you can't hear, you can't smell, taste or touch. Those 5 senses have been turned off. What's left? It's the mind is left. That's why when you first experience that, it's really strange. What the heck is this? Because very few people really get to know what the mind is. It can be scary for some people because it maybe bring up some memories of death experiences. But when you're in meditation, you always come back again, unfortunately. And that you're very, very safe. One of the, I don't mind telling this little story. When I was, last time I was in Sri Lanka at the conference there, that one of the disciples over there, I taught him meditation, he really likes my method, so he started his own little meditation group there with my permission. And I was in the hotel room and he said, the message came in, this guy here wants to come and see you, pay respects. So who is it? And so this doctor, okay, yeah, sure. And so I was supposed to be taking a rest. But I thought, just one fellow coming in, maybe just a little bow and a few words and he can go again. But he brought in his whole group, about 20 people. No peace for me. But anyway, so, we wanted to do a little meditation discussion, a bit of group meditation, usual stuff. But it was worth it because one of the stories he said, because one of his people in his group was a really good meditator. And I've known him for a long time, and very easy to get into these jhanas. And the doctor decided to do an experiment on him while he was in the jhana. And he videoed it. He always said he was going to send me the video, hasn't sent it yet, I don't know what's gone wrong with the video, but anyway. And on the video, I trusted, because the whole group saw this and said it was true, that while this guy was in jhana, the doctor just opened up his little medical kit, swabbed some alcohol on the guy's arm, took out a scalpel to try and make an incision. The scalpel wouldn't go in. The scalpel would not be able to cut the guy's flesh while he was in jhana. And that's amazing. So actually to extend the experiment, as scientists usually do. The next time they were a meeting together, he said, he told him what he did. He said, this time is okay if while you're in this deep meditation, I do an incision. And the man said, okay, yeah, sure, I trust you. So he did the same thing again. Just swabbed the arm, got out a scalpel. It went in with no problem, just like normally. So he made an incision in his arm because he had permission. And then he sewed up there was only a slight incision, and just disinfected, put a bandage on it. But all the time, the fellow never felt a thing. Because, in deep meditation. I thought it was, really quite a cool experiment. And the fellow did it with his consent. So there's not a problem there. But anyway, don't worry, I haven't got a medical license, so I won't do that for you. You've nothing to worry about. But anyway, this mind is an amazing thing. So what happens, once the 5 senses start to disappear, don't be afraid about that, because if you've got lots of joy, it means your mind is getting strong enough to take over. And once it takes over, this is where you experience the citta, the mind. And the way that most people experience it, and I'm careful with the language here, most people, not all people, but the best way most people experience it, is a beautiful light in the mind. And you can sort of start experiencing this with these visions and stuff. I always try and give this little story, Because I remember once when I was playing around with these Nimitus, you saw just this beautiful landscape, rolling hills and trees and nice river, and just in your mind you were sitting, I don't know where I was sitting, but a long way away from any vision like that. But then I realized that's too complicated. If you're going to see a nimitta, just keep it as simple as possible. And so just in that scenery, it was on one of the trees there was a little sparkle, like a dewdrop just glistening in the sunshine. And so just almost automatically, I don't know if, I cannot remember whether I decided to do this or it happened automatically, more likely automatically. Just your vision zoomed in onto that little sparkle. The most beautiful part of the most beautiful part of the most beautiful part. And then it just blossomed into this very simple, like moon-like light, the simple nimittas. And that's amazing. So this is actually what happens with these moving from this world, which is complicated. I was adding the scenery of the world, to these nimittas. And one of the nice things about when you do see these nimittas, the mind, is that because it's like a vision, it's like seeing it with your sense of sight. The reason I say that, I think anyway, that people interpret this as a vision, like a sense of sight, is because that's our most common sense organ. We use our sense of sight more than any other sense. Why that, you go to the airport, in those days anyway, when you could go to the airport, and they check who you are by what you look like your facial features. Not by, or maybe now you can maybe do your fingerprint or whatever, I'm not sure. But people really do a lot of sight stuff. So when this image comes up, it's usually seen as similar to a light. But it's much, much different than a real light because the color is pure. That's one of the delightful things. One of the signs that this is real nimittas. The yellows are more yellow than yellow. The blues are so deep. They're so beautiful. And that really stands out. If you see white, it's just whiter than any white you've ever seen with your eyes. And it's beautiful. And that's the usual sign of nimittas. And it's one of the reasons why that one range retreat a few years ago, I told the monks all about this because it was funny. You know that I like looking at comics. If I get a newspaper, that's the first thing I look at, comic strips. And one of my favourite comic strips is Calvin and Hobbes, Garfield. You know Garfield the cat? Okay. Anyway, I was sitting there again, really peaceful meditation, delightful breath, and just the breath got so soft and peaceful, it disappeared, and this beautiful nimitta came up. And it was really yellow, but not a yellow you can see in the real world. And it had a shape to it. When I recognized the shape, that was the end of that meditation. It was Garfield. The Garfield nimitta. It was crazy. But it was true. Because, that was, almost being into my mind. Like, when read the Garfield daily cartoon the day before or something. Maybe that morning. And that was in the mind. And when you saw this nimitta, it was just projecting most recent experiences from this world onto that nimitta. And I just couldn't help but burst out laughing. Because that's my character. You call it defilement, but it makes a nice, interesting story. But I knew it was the nimitta because of the colours. Gorgeous. So this is what happens when you get these nimittas. The mind is calming down. Sorry, the senses is calming down. The mind is getting some power and is taking over. And that's how you usually experience it. So as it says in Anapanasati, you start to know the nimitta. When the breath disappears, the nimittas. And again, for those people who say, Ajahn Brahm, you're just making this up, this is not in the suttas. Of course, I mentioned already, the Upakalesa Sutta, that's where the whole sutta by the Buddha, talking about just how to develop those nimittas and how to make sure that you don't lose out because of the two main problems of excitement or fear. Excitement, because, yeah, nimitta, I got a nimitta at last, yeah, I got a nimitta, woo! And of course, even the slightest bit of excitement, it disappears. Or sometimes fear. You're going to very powerful places now. And for the first time, one of the reasons I talk about this is because if you don't know what's happening, you've got no instructions at all, it just happens, that can really blow you apart. And, oh, what's happened here? So when you know it's fine, it's part of what meditation is, hopefully the fear won't come up. There's also the fear that your five senses have gone. And this is what protects us from damage in the world. We can't hear anything. So, somebody might come and steal our teddy bear or whatever else you're attached to. Or they may stab us, but you're perfectly safe. More safe than, if you've got your five senses working. So, to remind you that that's nothing to worry about at all. When they come up, then they can become quite stable. And the five senses have just stopped for a while in the realm of the mind. And of course, the longer you're with that mind, the more you can understand it. This is one of the Buddha's similes, that a goldsmith can only understand the nature of pure gold, if it's purified of any traces of other metals. So if you are a scientist and you want to find out the qualities of some substance, you've got to purify it first of all. So it's just gold, nothing but gold, pure gold, 100%. And then you can find out what it does. The same, he said, that's the same with the mind. You get into these deep meditations, once you've got just the mind, nothing else, no five senses, then you can understand exactly what it is. Exactly, what comes from your previous life, what goes into your next life if you're going to get one, and how powerful it is. How on earth it can happen that the mind can heal these cancers, which is not supposed to be healable. How they can take other stuff in your body, how it can stop a good doctor making an incision in your arm. All this miraculous stuff, which you hear in some religions, like Buddhism, you understand where this all comes from. Understanding the nature of this mind. And this is real stuff. You not just say these things to get donations or to get fame or whatever. This is real stuff. One of the reasons why that Buddhist monks aren't supposed to talk about their personal stuff. Generalizations, yes, but not personal. So this is a real, and you get to know what this mind is. But as you're starting to experience this citta, the next step in the Anapanasati is Abhi Promotion, which means actually to brighten the nimitta, to give it some more oomph, because sometimes it can come up and it is not enough energy. It's not bright enough, it's not powerful enough. Which is why sometimes the people they describe to me, sometimes they, and it's worthy of saying it, it's called a sheet nimitta sometimes. So you can see a light in the mind, but it's not really brilliant. It's just like a dull white light. Okay, yeah, fair enough. But you haven't got enough oomph in your mind. It's not energized enough. It hasn't got enough happiness, basically, because you know that energy is happiness. And I tell the monks this, that if I have a really good, I have to apologize sometimes, because if I have a really good meditation and come out just bubbly and happy and jokey and stuff, because you've got huge energies inside you. But if you haven't had a good meditation, you're dull and sleepy. And it's why that sometimes that in my life, having to do too many things, too many talks, and if things don't go according to schedule, you get really exhausted. You meditate and whoa, you got your energy back again. Huge energies. So this is actually how you brighten up your mind, so that when the five senses disappear, your mind is really brilliant and beautiful. So if it's like a sheet nimitta or just any old coloured nimitta, and it's not really powerful, the trick is to look for the most beautiful part in that nimitta. It might be like a cloth, and some, it's been used, so some are nice and clean, some is just dirty. So I remember telling this to there's one fellow over in Kuala Lumpur. He was actually one of two twins, and they used to look after me when I visited Kuala Lumpur, and I didn't know which one was which. They looked so similar. And anyway, I gave a talk, one of the first talks, deep talks on nimittas, and he came up afterwards and said, Ajahn Brahm, I got a nimitta, but it was just really like a dirty old cloth you get from the rag heap. And I looked at him and said, what have you been doing? He said, yeah, that's the problem, I'm sorry, breaking all my precepts. Because this is what happens. Breaking precepts, you may argue to yourself, oh, they deserved it, or there's only just one glass of beer, or there's small stuff. But this is actually much, much more honest than any of your thoughts when you see a nimitta. If you have got any precepts which you haven't been really pure in, you'll find your nimitta's got stains in it. You're seeing your mind. And you understand why these things are called defilements or stains, impurities. You see the mind of, ooh, yeah, I know what that was. But you don't have to be disappointed because, it's just being honest. If you have good precepts, if you're really kind and generosity doesn't mean just giving donations. You see someone has missed their lunch and you get them some lunch for them. Look, I know you had a deep meditation, I've seen what you like, so I've just saved this for you. Those acts of generosity and kindness which people have, they always like sort of, say, some strawberry jam or something, and there's hardly any strawberry jam left. You take some and give it to them. So this is for you. That sort of acts of kindness and beauty and purity of your conduct, that just makes your nimitta so incredible, bright and beautiful. Wow. And that's sometimes why that people I've known a long time, always there to help, and sometimes they never ask for anything, they never say who's doing it. Those people are really kind, good precepts, never say the wrong thing to anybody. Because this is the way things work, this is the nature. When they get nimittas, they're going to be amazing nimittas. They've given so much, they've helped so much, they haven't really thought of themselves and just how can I serve and help. When their nimittas come up, their mind is so incredibly powerful and beautiful. Whoa! Have a wonderful time. But those who don't, you see the stained old nimitta, just look for the most beautiful part in it. And your mind will go into the most beautiful part, and that beautiful part will expand. You go into the most beautiful part, the most beautiful part, the most beautiful part. It's one of the reasons that story of the two bad bricks on the wall was not sort of a pop psychology example. That was incredibly deep. When I understood what that story meant, why is it we always look at the faults? And so the beauty is much greater, but the mistakes, we keep looking at that. Saying last night about lack of self-compassion, of forgiveness to yourself. You've done so much amazing, wonderful things in your life. You're incredibly good people. No, not me. You don't know me, Ajahn Brahm. I know more about you than you think. So you're beautiful. You go inside and look at that beautiful part inside of you. Yeah, I'm not such a bad person after all. Hey, you feel happy. Not only that, that makes you do more good things. And that's when you get to nimittas, it's almost automatic. You always look for the beautiful part. And you forgive any sort of bad bricks in the wall of your nimitta. You go and zoom into the good stuff. Zoom into the good stuff of the good stuff of the good stuff. These incredibly powerful nimittas. And the next thing to do is to keep those nimittas still. Keep them there. One little thing I will say on this subject is that sometimes, when people have these nimittas, sometimes you're meditating and the nimitta appears up here somewhere, not really centered. You can sort of see it, but it's not really in the middle of you. You try and move to see it, zoom in on it, and it goes away. It's almost like that nimitta is like testing you out. Are you ready for me? Are you still enough? Are you content enough? If you move, it will move away. If you stay there, it's lovely to see this. It happens to me sometimes, and Nimitus just on the edge there somewhere. You know it now. Just, okay, if you want to come, fine. If you don't want to come, fine. And you're just staying there, and it just comes in front of you when it's ready. And of this, I wanted to introduce Ajahn Chah's great simile on Nimitus. And somebody used this as a title for a book. And they didn't mention what this was really about. And it was at the still forest pool. And the still forest pool, the original simile for that was talking about Jhana, Nimitus. This Ajahn Chah would say that when he used to go and stay in the jungles, you'd always have to find like a lake, a river, or a well sometime in the afternoon. Because walking in the jungles is just so sort of sweaty. Everyone needed to bathe. You need to bathe some of your robes and also get some water for drinking. So you'd always find a body of water. There's plenty of water around. There's somewhere in Thailand. And then you'd put up your mosquito net umbrella, and that's where you'd meditate that night. And so when I went on that tudong, Ajahn Chah gave lots and lots of advice. And one of the pieces of advice he gave, he said, you go to some of these places, lots of wild animals there. And he said, like, sometimes be careful of the elephants. Because little baby elephants, like most little baby creatures, they're really curious and naughty. And they see this mosquito net up there in the forest. And they like to put their trunk nose underneath the net. They're actually underneath the mosquito net where you're sitting. And he said, if that ever happens, bang that baby elephant on the nose. That hurts it. He said, yes, but it'll make it run away and not come back again. Because if you play with it, which is a lovely thing to be able to do, a little baby elephant, really cute, give it a scratch or whatever, then the mother won't be that far away. And that mother will kill you. So there's some serious stuff. I remember Ajahn Chah saying, so, yeah, I know you don't like hurting anything, but just give it a knock on the nose, which is really sensitive, and it'll run away, and you'll be safe, you will live. So anyway, he also said that don't worry about tigers as well, because tigers don't eat monks. I never actually said this. I wasn't sort of brave enough to be cheeky, but I didn't believe Ajahn Chah. How do you know? If a tiger ate a monk, the monk wouldn't be there to say, and the tiger wouldn't confess. So who knows? But anyway, and he always would say, just move your mosquito net maybe about 10 meters away from the edge of the water, so you're not that close, because in the evening all the animals will come out to drink and play. And they bring their family, their kids as well. That's why you've got to be very careful, because they may feel safe with you around, but with kids around, they become hypersensitive. And so, he said he used to do that, and he would sit there. Sometimes he would meditate, sometimes in the evening, especially if there was like a moon up, he would keep his eyes open, watch the animals come out to play by the still forest pool. And this is where you got these amazing examples of Nimitas and Jhanas. It was really helpful for me, because it showed not so much what you should do, but what you shouldn't do. So he said that sometimes the ordinary animals would come out. Then after the ordinary animals would come out, these amazing animals would come out. Animals he'd never seen before. Really beautiful animals who were incredibly shy. And you always must remember that the most dangerous animal in the forest is the human being. So if ever you feel afraid of seeing a snake or a tiger or a bear, remember there's many more bears have been killed by humans than the other way around. So they're terrified of us, especially again with their family. So it said sometimes you sit so perfectly still, these really rare animals would come out to play by the still forest pool. And you have to always remember not to move, not to say, wow. Just one little wow, and the animals would pick it up. They'd go back into the forest and not come out again, even if they were thirsty. So it had to be so quiet. He said sometimes it was so quiet and peaceful, the animals would come and have a look and smell, mostly smelling and hearing. And then they thought no one was there, so they'd come and play by the still forest pool. So it was delightful. I mean, monks don't watch TV, and this was the days before Nature Channel or National Geographic or whatever it is you have. It was fascinating to watch all of this. It was good entertainment for a monk in the evening. But then sometimes, he said, after these amazing, beautiful animals would come out and play by the still forest pool, then these other animals would come out. He said these were animals that were so incredibly beautiful and so rare to see. And animals his teachers and parents had never told him existed. He had to be really, really still, not moving at all. And then these animals would come out to play by the still forest pool. He says those were the jhanas. Before, the most really beautiful animals were like Nimitus. And that really was very helpful, because if any of these Nimitus come up, you've got to imagine that you're like an Ajahn in the forest. If you move, get excited, get afraid, those little Nimitus will pick it up, they'll run away again. Don't spoil it. Don't say, yeah, Nimitta. What did I say that for? And they run away again. And nothing need to be afraid. And then you start to get to understand what this mind is, how powerful it is, how beautiful it is, how pleasant it is. And then eventually that will lead you on to the edge of the jhanas. Incredible animals come out. And those really give you powerful insights into what this mind is. This body is pretty temporary. This mind lasts much longer. It's not eternal, but you find out exactly what it is. If I told you, would you understand? No, you don't. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay. So please don't want these things, because you inspire people. Oh yeah, Nimitus. I'm going to do Nimitus this morning. Don't do that. Just sit peacefully and wait. Okay, we have interviews now. If anyone wants to interview.